Stop. The Arcturian High Council has already identified your field. What you have been calling rejection, distance, and loss is not what it appears to be. It is the visible surface of a deeper process. One the Arcturian High Council has already mapped, already recognized, and is now transmitting directly to your path. You did not arrive here through casual scrolling. The separation already active in your life is what made this signal reachable. The algorithm only delivered it. It did not create the timing. By the end of this transmission, you will understand exactly why your life has felt like it is narrowing, what is being removed from your path, and what the Arcturian High Council already knows about this phase. But here is the first revelation. The people who have pulled away, the doors that have closed, the spaces in your life that have gone quiet, these are not failures of connection. They are the earliest signs of a marking protocol now being activated on your field. The old line was not strong enough to hold what you are becoming. It weakened first. The visible distance followed. Tonight, a marking protocol is active. This is not language used lightly. The Council issues these only within a strict stillness window, because movement during a marking distorts the imprint. You may already feel it, an unusual weight in the body, a pull towards stillness that has no explanation, a disappearance of urgency that does not match the pace of your day. That is not tiredness. That is your field, responding to the registration already underway. The Arcturian High Council is entering your soul-level identification into the lineage record. You are being rendered traceable. You are being seen at a frequency that does not require your permission, only your stillness. This is a rare Arcturian separation protocol being revealed now. What has been falling away from your life was never yours to hold on to. It was the old environment releasing you. The pruning was not punishment. The narrowing was not loss. It was preparation, root refinement, the selected line pulling away from everything that could not accompany it forward. Comment 777 if you feel the old line is already falling away. Comment, I was separated, if you now recognize that what looked like rejection carried a deeper meaning. Like this transmission if you know your life has been narrowing for a reason. Subscribe to Arcturian Chosen Path if you are ready to understand the separation, instead of blaming yourself. And share this transmission with someone who feels alone, cut off, or misunderstood, and cannot explain why. The path is already responding to what has been removed. You are guided here because the separation is already active. What you are feeling right now is not the ordinary weight of a difficult season. It is something more precise than that. It is the sensation of a life being reorganized at a level beneath the one you normally operate from. A reorganization that does not ask your opinion, does not announce itself through clear language, and does not feel like progress while it is happening. It feels like loss. It feels like falling behind. It feels like something is wrong with you specifically, not with a process, not with a phase, not with a separation already underway. The shame that accompanies it is not a symptom of weakness. It is a symptom of misidentification. You have been reading a structured removal as personal failure, and that misreading has cost you far more than the removal itself. What makes this particular weight so difficult to carry is that it does not announce itself as a phase. It does not arrive with visible edges or a clear beginning. It seeps in gradually, a friendship that requires more effort than it used to, a group that feels slightly off in ways you cannot name, a conversation that ends and leaves you more hollow than before it started. And because it arrives slowly, you absorb it as your own deficiency rather than recognizing it as the early signature of a structural event. You start monitoring yourself, analyzing your tone, your availability, your willingness to adapt. You adjust, you soften, you try different approaches, and the distance persists anyway, because the distance was never a response to your behavior. It was a consequence of your frequency outpacing the frequency of the configuration around you. The adjustments you made could not close that gap. Nothing behavioral could, because the gap was not behavioral in origin. This is the first thing the Arcturian transmission needs you to hear clearly. The people who have withdrawn, the relationships that have become strained beyond repair, the social environments that no longer feel like yours, the circles that once held you and now simply do not. None of this began with your failure. It began with incompatibility, and incompatibility is not the same as deficiency. Incompatibility means the old configuration could not accompany the new line forward. The old environment had a frequency ceiling, and when your path began moving above that ceiling, the environment did not rise to meet it. The environment separated. The distance you feel is the measure of that gap. There is a pattern to this that the Arcturian Council has already mapped. It does not unfold randomly. It does not target people indiscriminately. It activates along specific lines, selected lines, at specific thresholds, and it follows a recognizable sequence. Not everyone experiences it. Not every life goes through this kind of structural pruning, but some do. And those who do almost always interpret it the same way initially. They blame themselves. They review every conversation for what they said wrong. They search their own history for the flaw that caused everyone to move away. They try harder to maintain connections that are already dissolving at the root. They confuse the symptom, the relational distance, with the cause, some defect in who they are. And that confusion is precisely what extends the suffering beyond what the separation itself would require. The review process is painful in a specific way. You go back through your memory cataloging moments where you might have been too much, or not enough. Too direct, too quiet, too intense, too withdrawn. You construct a version of yourself that explains the distance, a self who drove people away through some invisible combination of traits, and that constructed self feels credible because it accounts for the pattern. It explains the repetition. It makes the losses make sense, but it makes them make sense at the wrong level. It explains the pattern through personal pathology when the pattern is actually navigational. The losses are not a record of your failures. They are a record of your path, crossing the frequency threshold of one configuration after another, and continuing to move. You may have noticed that this is not limited to one relationship, one environment, or one time period. You may have noticed that the pattern repeats, that the same dynamic appears in different forms across different circles, new environments eventually producing the same strangeness, new relationships eventually producing the same subtle distance, the same feeling of not quite belonging fully, not quite being understood completely, not quite being held by any configuration you enter. That repetition is not evidence that you are impossible to love or impossible to know. It is evidence that the separation has a logic of its own. It follows the path, not the specific relationships. Wherever the path goes, the incompatibility eventually surfaces. Because the incompatibility is not about those people. It is about the selected line continuing to move through environments that were never designed to hold it long term. The repetition carries a specific instruction inside it, though most people cannot read it while they are inside the pain of it. The instruction is this: stop trying to resolve the incompatibility through effort. The incompatibility is not a problem to be solved by becoming more acceptable to environments that your path has already exceeded. It is a signal that the environment has served its phase and is releasing its hold. Every time you encountered that strangeness in a new circle, every time you felt the subtle wrongness settle in despite your attempts to belong, that was the path continuing its work, not the same mistake repeating. The same process, completing another stage. The Arcturian understanding of this process is precise. What is being described here is not simply loneliness in the ordinary sense. Ordinary loneliness is the absence of connection. What is happening along a selected line during a separation phase is something more structured. It is the active removal of relational configurations that would have anchored the path to a frequency it can no longer sustain. Think of a route that must climb. For that route to rise, it must leave behind certain terrain. It cannot carry the full weight of the previous landscape upward. The connections, environments, and relational contexts that belong to the lower terrain begin to fall away, not because they were worthless, not because the path has rejected them, but because the geometry of the ascent makes it impossible for them to remain attached. They release. The path feels lighter and more alone at the same time. Both sensations are accurate. Both are consequences of the same movement. What has been exposed in you does not need more self-blame. It needs clearer recognition and proper guidance. If you know this message touched a process that has already started, Chosen One Manifest, the protocol for selected souls, was built for exactly that threshold. It is a structured path protocol for those whose route is already narrowing and who need to understand the logic of the separation before fear mislabels it as failure. It does not offer comfort in the ordinary sense. It offers a map, a direct protocol for reading what is being removed, understanding what that removal is preparing, and moving through the refinement with enough clarity to stop calling separation by the wrong name. The complete access point is in the first pinned comment, but only for a limited window. There is a specific sign that appears early in a separation phase that almost no one correctly identifies in the moment. It is the sudden sense that your own explanations no longer land. You try to articulate what you are going through to people who have known you for years, and something in the transmission fails. They hear the words but not the meaning. They offer responses that are kind but somehow entirely beside the point. You leave those conversations feeling more isolated than before you attempted them. Not because the people were unkind, but because the language you are using to describe your current experience belongs to a world your path has already begun to leave. The old vocabulary cannot carry the new weight. The people still fluent in that old vocabulary cannot hear what you are actually trying to say, because what you are saying has no equivalent in the framework they are still operating from. This is not their failure, it is a frequency gap, and the frequency gap is one of the earliest indicators that the path has moved above the threshold of the old line. What makes this sign so disorienting is that the people you are speaking to are genuinely trying to understand. The failure is not one of care or intention, it is a failure of translation. You are speaking from inside an experience that does not have an established name in the shared language you once relied on. The words exist: loss, distance, isolation, confusion, but they point to different things for you than they do for the people receiving them. For the listener, loss means something has ended and grief is appropriate. For you, the loss carries a pressure that is not quite grief and not quite fear and not quite emptiness. It is closer to the sensation of standing at an edge you were not warned about, looking back at terrain you can no longer re-enter, and not yet being able to see what is ahead. That is not a feeling that the old vocabulary was built to carry. And until the new vocabulary forms, until the correct interpretive frame is found, the attempt to communicate across that gap will continue to leave you more alone than before you tried. The second recognizable phase of this process involves what might be called the acceleration of incompatibility. This is the period in which environments that once felt tolerable suddenly feel actively wrong. Social situations that you once navigated without significant discomfort begin to produce a specific kind of exhaustion, not physical tiredness, but a depletion that feels more like exposure, as if being in those spaces costs something at a level you cannot afford to keep paying. You may find yourself withdrawing from events, gatherings, routines, and relationships that once formed the structure of your social world. Not dramatically, not with anger or announcement, just quietly stepping back, attending less, engaging with less investment, finding that the pull toward those spaces has dissolved without a satisfying explanation. People around you may read this as depression, social anxiety, arrogance, or withdrawal. The Arcturian interpretation is different. This is the path asserting its incompatibility with environments that can no longer hold it. The discomfort is not a malfunction. It is the field's response to being in configurations it has grown beyond. The acceleration is identifiable by a specific quality of wrongness that does not map onto any single grievance. You are not angry at any individual person. You are not responding to a specific conflict or wound. The wrongness is ambient. It is the texture of the room rather than anything said within it. It is the quality of the air in spaces that once felt like yours. And because it has no clean object, no clear cause you can point to, it becomes easy to pathologize. You wonder if you are becoming antisocial. You wonder if something has broken in your capacity for ease. You try to push through the wrongness and attend, engage, invest, and you find that the depletion on the other side is worse than if you had stayed away. Because you are not just tired from the social exertion, you are depleted from the sustained incompatibility, from spending extended time in a frequency field that your path has already left. The third phase is perhaps the most destabilizing. It is the phase in which your own sense of identity becomes temporarily unanchored. The relationships and environments that were falling away had been serving, among other things, as mirrors. They reflected back a version of you that was coherent within their framework. When they begin to fall away, those reflections go with them, and you are left without the external confirmations that were quietly telling you who you were, what you were doing, and whether it was working. This is when the self-questioning intensifies. Not just questioning of decisions, but questioning at a deeper level, questioning of purpose, direction, and whether the path has any coherent destination at all. This is what makes the separation phase feel most like failure, because without those external mirrors, there is no immediate evidence that the path is leading anywhere. There is only the narrowing. There is only the reduction. There is only the increasing quiet of a life that used to feel full and now feels stripped. But here is what the Arcturian framework recognizes about that stripping. The mirrors that fell away were not neutral. They were not simply reflecting who you are. They were reflecting who you were within a specific configuration, at a specific frequency level, in a specific chapter of the path. When the path moves, the accuracy of those old reflections degrades. What they show is no longer a true image. It is a historical image, an image of a you that existed before the separation began. Holding on to that image, or grieving its loss as though it was the truest thing, keeps the path from recognizing what it is actually becoming. The unanchored feeling is not a sign of disintegration. It is a sign that the old self-image has been correctly released. The new one has not yet formed. The space between is uncomfortable, but it is not empty in the way it feels. It is empty in the way that cleared ground is empty. Something new requires that clearing before it can be structured. The interval between the historical self-image and the forming one is where most of the misidentification occurs, because the human mind requires coherence. It needs a working identity to navigate from. And when the external sources of that identity have withdrawn, the mind reaches for whatever is available, including the story of personal defect. The defect story at least provides a coherent explanation for why everything has changed. It names a cause, it names an agent. It places the self at the center of the loss in a way that at least makes the loss legible. The Arcturian reading of this mechanism is not judgment. It is recognition. The defect story arises because the correct story, the story of path refinement and structural separation, has not yet been made available. This transmission exists precisely to make it available, to offer the path the language it needs before confusion hardens into a self-concept that the path then has to carry forward. The fourth recognition involves what might be called the loneliness of accurate perception. There is a specific kind of isolation that arrives when you begin to see situations, relationships, and patterns of behavior with a clarity that those around you do not share. You notice dynamics that others are not tracking. You feel implications in conversations that others take at face value. You sense trajectories in relationships before they become visible to the other people involved. And rather than this clarity being validating, it is often isolating. Because clarity without community is a particular form of solitude. You cannot share what you see without disrupting the ease of the environment you are in. You cannot pretend not to see it without a cost to your own integrity. So you sit with the perception quietly, and the quiet accumulates into a specific kind of loneliness that is not about lacking people. It is about lacking people who are operating at the same level of recognition. This is the loneliness that precedes repositioning. It is the interval between the old community and the one that will form along the refined line. It is real. It is not a symptom of disorder. It is a structural feature of a path between two configurations. What this clarity costs in the short term is significant. You begin to self-censor in environments where full expression would produce confusion or conflict. You learn to carry the larger frame of what you perceive privately because the social cost of sharing it consistently outweighs the temporary relief. This self-containment is not dishonesty. It is the path protecting its own signal from environments that would misread and dilute it. But it does accumulate. The weight of sustained, unexpressed perception is one of the heaviest parts of this phase, and it is also one of the most frequently misread, both by the path itself and by the people around it. From the outside, the containment looks like aloofness or disengagement or superiority. From the inside, it feels like exhaustion and a persistent, low-grade grief for the ease of belonging that used to be available without negotiation. The fifth phase is the one that either breaks the misreading or confirms it. It is the moment when you begin to look at the full pattern of your losses, your distances, your relational collapses, and your persistent incompatibilities, and either conclude that you are fundamentally broken or begin to suspect that the pattern has a logic that is larger than personal defect. This is the threshold moment. Most people do not reach it without help, because the accumulated weight of shame, self-rejection, and misidentification makes the personal defect interpretation feel like the obvious one. It feels humble to accept it. It feels honest. It feels like taking responsibility, but it is not honest. It is a misread. Taking responsibility for a process that is not rooted in personal failure is not humility, it is confusion. And confusion at this level costs the path its orientation. The Arcturian interpretation is not that you are perfect, without fault, or beyond the ordinary need for growth and correction. That would be a different kind of misread. The Arcturian interpretation is specifically that the relational pattern of loss, distance, falling away, and incompatibility, when it is persistent, when it appears across different environments, when it follows the path rather than specific relationships, is not primarily a story about the individual's defects. It is primarily a story about a path that is being refined, a line that is being selected, a route that is being narrowed down to what can actually carry what is coming. And those are entirely different stories. They have different emotional textures, different interpretive frames, different implications for how the path moves forward. The sixth recognition is this: what feels like the absence of belonging may actually be the beginning of belonging to a different level. The sense of not fitting has been relentless. It has appeared in work environments, social circles, family configurations, romantic structures, community spaces, everywhere. And the consistent misfit has felt like evidence of a consistent personal defect. But consider an alternative reading. Consider that fitting is a function of frequency. That belonging is not a universal capacity distributed equally regardless of path. that some configurations belong to certain frequency levels and not others, and that when a path moves above the frequency of the environments it was previously nested inside, the sense of fitting naturally dissolves, not because the path has failed, but because the path has moved. The absence of belonging in old environments is not proof that belonging is unavailable. It is proof that the old environments no longer correspond to the path's current frequency. The belonging that the path requires exists at the level the path is moving toward. It has not arrived yet, but the absence of it in old spaces is not its absence from the path entirely. There is a particular cruelty in the timing of this recognition, because the longing for belonging does not decrease as the old configurations dissolve. If anything, it intensifies. The need for a community that can hold the full weight of the path's perception, the full complexity of its experience, the full reach of what it is becoming, that need becomes sharper as the old mirrors fade. And the sharpness of that need, in the absence of its fulfillment, is what makes this phase feel most like deprivation. But the Arcturian reading holds a different interpretation of that sharpness. Acute longing directed towards something that does not yet exist in the immediate environment is not evidence of permanent lack. It is evidence of a path that knows what it requires and has not yet arrived at the configuration where that requirement will be met. The longing is the path reading its own destination. It is directional. It is not despair. Even when it feels exactly like despair, what has been happening in your life is not the story you have been telling about it. It is not the story of a person who cannot sustain connection, cannot maintain relationships, cannot hold a stable social world, cannot be understood or accepted. That story, while emotionally credible given everything you have experienced, is built on the wrong interpretive foundation. The foundation it needs is this: you are not watching your life deteriorate, you are watching your path narrow. And those are not the same event. Deterioration removes and leaves nothing. Narrowing removes what cannot accompany the route and leaves only what can. The route becomes more precise, more aligned, more capable of carrying what is being built along it. The people, environments, and configurations that have fallen away were not the final version of your relational world. They were what existed at a frequency the path has now exceeded. The path does not mourn the exceeded frequencies, it moves. And here is the final thing this transmission needs to make clear. The Arcturian High Council does not read your separation phase as evidence that you have failed. It does not read the relational collapse as punishment. It does not read the loneliness as abandonment. It reads it as preparation, specifically as the kind of preparation that only becomes necessary when what is coming requires a cleared and refined field to land in. The pruning happened because growth is coming that the old configuration could not have accommodated. The distance happened because direction is forming that the old circles could not have sustained. The narrowing happened because the path is real, specific, and demanding, and it required the removal of everything that would have diffused its signal. What fell away was not your life. It was the freight the path could not carry forward. Speak this, if it is true for you. Say it aloud, or hold it clearly in whatever stillness you are already in. I do not call the pruning rejection. I was not discarded, I was separated. And the separation is not the end of the path, it is the evidence that the path is real. Before you scroll, leave one sign in the comments that this separation has already touched your life. It could be people falling away, the feeling of not belonging, repeated distance, unexplained isolation, or the sense that your old path no longer fits. Name it clearly. If this transmission recognizes something you have been carrying in silence, share it with someone who feels alone, cut off, or misunderstood, and cannot explain why. And if you are ready to understand the separation instead of blaming yourself, subscribe to Arcturian Chosen Path. You are not watching this by accident. You are recognizing a path already in motion. and this is only the beginning.